right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AI and Big Data in Finance webinar. We are delighted to have two distinguished speakers with us today. So we're going to have Alberto Rossi from Georgetown University, who's going to present his paper, Crowdsourcing Peer Information to Change Spending Behavior. And David Hirshleifer from USC is going to be the discussant. So Alberto, you're going to have 30 minutes for your presentation. And after about 15 minutes, I may briefly interrupt in case there are any questions from the audience to ask any clarifying questions. And David, you're going to have 20 minutes for your discussion. Afterwards, we're going to open the floor for questions from the audience. As audience, please do submit your questions in the Q&A, and then I will call on you during the questioning part. As a reminder, please be respectful with your comments. The presentation and the discussion are going to be recorded, and together with the slides, they're going to be posted on our website. After the main part of the webinar, we're going to have an unrecorded discussion where everyone in the audience is going to be upgraded to a panelist. Alberto, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Leah, for the kind introduction. Let me just give me a second to share my screen. Please let me know if you have issues seeing the paper. I don't think so. Okay. And yeah, so thank you for the very kind introduction. As mentioned, this is the title of the paper is Crowdsourcing Peer Information to Change Spending Behavior. And this is a joint work with Francesco D'Acunto at Georgetown and Michael Weber at the University of Chicago and NBR. And before getting into the paper, let me just kind of motivate a little bit this work within my mine and Francesco's agenda within robo-advising. Like one of the starting point that I would like to talk to kind of convey in this talk is the fact that whenever I talk to practitioners and also academics, there is this common perception that robo-advising is really just automated advice for portfolio allocation. So people, when I talk about robo-advising, they think about Betterment or Wealthfront, they think about Personal Capital or Vanguard. But if you think about the decisions that individuals have to make, or the household's decisions, they're much, much more complex. So individuals have to, if you think about an individual or a household as a firm, households will have assets, they will have liabilities. And so, of course, on the asset side, they will have financial assets, and that's where kind of the traditional way of talking about robo-advising is commonly referred to. But households also have to decide how much to invest in durable assets, for example. And on the liability side, households have to decide what kind of mortgage decision to take, what kind of credit card to choose from. And so robo-advising really should be thought of as a kind of automated advice across all these domains of individuals' choices. And this is kind of where the kind of this research agenda comes into play. If I have, and if you're interested in this work, I have a work on the kind of the traditional connotation for robo-advice. So robo-advising for investment decisions, and across this area, there are like the first few papers we're really trying to get some facts right, and now the type of work that we are trying to get into is to try and understand really what are the needs and the wants in financial advice, and what is the role of algorithmic aversion, and how does it what kind of role does it play in the adoption of robo-advice. But in this other kind of exceptional connotation of robo-advising, this kind of fintech for consumption, saving, and debt decision, then there is a kind of another set of papers that are really trying to understand how individuals can benefit from automation when it comes to making better saving decisions, for example, in this paper, or making better peer-to-peer lending decisions, and in the paper on costly cultural biases. And finally, also we have work that tries to understand how robo-advising can be used to help individuals making better debt management decisions. So what I'm going to present today is this paper titled Crowdsourcing Peer Information to Change Spending Behavior. But the way we really think about it as how much can we use automation and robo-advice to help individuals maybe making better consumption decision. So I'd like you to think about this paper in the following way. And so the motivation for this work is that we know that low savings really are the kind of the main force behind individuals not having enough wealth accumulated when they retire. And actually deciding the optimal saving rate is rather complicated for individuals, and it's actually difficult also for economists. And so most of the time individuals try to acquire information on how much they should spend by looking at others. And this is where the potential role for the visibility bias introduced by Hirshleifer and Walden comes into place, right? If you are kind of making inferences on others' spending choices, but you don't see the full consumption of individuals, but only the conspicuous part, you may think that other individuals are really spending much more than they really are. And this may lead you to overconsume. And this is kind of a mechanism that is likely to be very, very strongly accentuated by social media. And just to give you a sense of what I have in mind, let me take the opportunity to mock one of my co-authors here. If you were looking at Michael Weber's Instagram account, you would see him sipping champagne on the balcony, but really you will not see the kind of the breakfast and the lettuce dinner that he may have on a weekly night when he's working on the revisions of his paper, or is working on new working paper, right? So these biased inferences are really likely to lead severe overconsumption. And so the natural question is, how can we fix this, right? How can we correct this biased inference? Now, in principle, what we would want to do is to provide information on the overall spending of individuals to everyone else. But of course, this is very difficult, if not impossible, to implement using traditional tools. This is until today, when technology is allowing us to achieve this goal and this mechanism. So what we're going to be doing in this paper, we're collaborating with an income aggregator called Status. And you can really think about this tool as a robo-advisor for consumption. So what this tool does is take information from investors or individuals' consumption, saving, and investment behavior, and it's going to then create what we saw an income aggregation type of information for the users. So it's going to give information to the users regarding what are their assets, their liabilities, what is their spending. But I think more importantly, what it's going to do is give information on the individual's spending to peer spending. So in the spending of individuals that are similar to the user. Now, you can think about this paper as trying to first understand whether individuals react to this information and how they react. And as a side product, this really allows us, this setting allows us to understand and study peer effects in a setting where we can rule out common shocks and socialization as the main driver or possible confounding factors in trying to understand how peer effects affect individuals' decision. And just to give you a sense of the overall kind of type of results I'm going to be showing you today. Let me just explain to you what this plot does. This is kind of what I would say like one of the key results we report in the paper. What we're doing here, we're doing a bin scatter plot of the changing spending behavior 3 months and before and after adopting the app. And what we have on the x-axis is the distance from the peer. So that is nothing else but how much you were consuming in excess or less than your peers at the time of sign up. So for all those people to the right of zero, what these people are people that were over-consuming compared to their peers. And by the way, this X variable is being standardized so that 1 and 2, you can think about it, standard deviations of consumption in excess or in less than your peers. And on the Y-hand side is we have this change in consumption. So what you'll notice is a couple of things. You'll notice that those people that are overspending before using the app, after seeing information about their peers, they reduce their spending. The same effect happens on the left-hand side in a sense that the less, the more in the negative you were respect to the kind of spending with respect to your peers, the more you actually increase consumption. But you'll see that there are 2 other things that are important here. You have some asymmetry in the reaction in the sense that those that are overspending reduce their consumption more than those that increase their consumption when they were underspending. Then what we'll show you is that, or what we show in that picture is that the distance from peers actually affect the reaction monotonically. And in the rest part of the talk, I'm going to show you that there is a stronger reaction if the signal, this peer information, is more informative, if individuals are of lower income. And then finally, one of the big issues that we have with this kind of work is that it is based on a selected population, right? So the majority of people, or everyone that we see on this app, are people that decided to enroll into this app. So we're going to assess the external validity of our finding using a randomized control trial on the non-selected population. And I'm going to be more precise in a minute about that. But let me take a step back and tell you how the app works. So if you were to sign up for status, what you would do is you would declare your annual income that can be, of course, verified ex post by the transactions account. You would put your age, your home ownership status, your location of residence, whether you're in a rural or urban environment, and the social security number in order to control and so that status can obtain your credit report. And then you'll be required to link all your debit and credit accounts, so all your checking accounts or your checking cards, and then also link your retirement and investment accounts. So once you were, if you were to do it, what status would do is create peer groups for you. So if you were, for example, 42 years of age, making $140,000, living in New York with a credit score of 762, what status would do is match you to people that are similar to you. You see, with an income that ranges from 100 to 150 in New York, and credit score ranging from 720 to 779. Now, the way this the app constructs this peer group is actually crucial, and we're going to be using this the features on how they bucket individuals. But what I think is important is that every individual is assigned to a peer group. The peers are matched on all the characteristics I've shown you, subject to the constraint that there are at least 5,000 individuals in the group. Then status purchase spending data from a random sample of US users. So we are not, the peer consumption is not based on other users on the app. And I think this is actually going to be quite important later on in the discussion. And so then what the app does, it really gives you an information as to how the individual is consuming compared to the peers. And the information is really easy to understand and salient. Just to give you a sense of how the screenshot used to look at the time of the analysis, what we have here is in blue, the spending over the course of the month of October by the individual. And what you have is that the projected spending of the peers, the national average, and also you can see the average income that the individuals had over the previous few months. So if you were to sign up, you would see in this case, for example, that the individual is heavily over-consuming compared to the peers and the national average. And in terms of the type of users we have 21,000 users in our sample. They're approximately 32 years of age. They have a credit score of 736. 40% of them are homeowners. Their annual income is relatively high. It's around $92,000. For the most part, these individuals are actually underspenders, so they spend less than their peers. And approximately every month they consume or they spend $5,000. Now, these individuals are all located within the US. And so if I were to use the IP and map it out in a graph, you would see that you would recover really the shape of the US. Okay, so let me just get first of all into the results that are related to the raw data. The first thing we wanted to do is to study the change in spending behavior around sign up. So we're going to be using the spending 3 months and prior and 3 months after the sign up, and we're going to split the sample into individuals that are spending above and below the peers at the time of sign up, and then we seasonally adjust the spending to make sure that, of course, we expect people to spend more in December, for example, when they are purchasing items for Christmas compared to another period. Now, If I were to set the exogenous threshold at 0, the same way, this is exactly the same plot I had in the motivation slides, what you'll see is that those people that are over-consuming at the time of sign-up, they really reduce their spending. And instead, those that are under-consuming, they react less, but if anything, they increase their spending after signing up. But of course, you may be not convinced by these results. In a sense, you may think that maybe this threshold 0 is too arbitrary. Luckily, we have procedures where we can estimate endogenously threshold regression. There's a procedure by Bruce Hansen in 2000. And what we're doing here is we effectively are estimating a model where we endogenously pick the optimal threshold. And we estimate linear regressions to the left and to the right of this threshold. What you'll see is that, first of all, this threshold is estimated really close to 0. And in fact, we can't reject the null that the threshold is at 0. And then we also find that the reaction is really different above and below this threshold level. If you were still unconvinced by this, what we could estimate, and what we did estimate, is estimate the kink regression results, which are nothing else but piecewise spline regressions where we have a single knot. And also in this case, we find that the estimated threshold is very close to 0, and we have that the slope coefficients are very different to the left and to the right of the consumption with respect to peer threshold. Now, as a reality check, what we wanted to do is to understand whether this was coming from discretionary or non-discretionary spending. Of course, we can use information on the categorization of consumption within our app. And what I'm showing you here on the left is that if we divide the overall consumption I was showing you into discretionary spending and non-discretionary spending, the entirety of the result or the entirety of the effect would come from discretionary spending. And then instead, non-discretionary spending that it comprises rent, utilities, and so on and so forth are not affected. This is just to say that really it seems to be the case that this peer information goes and affect all the spending, the discretionary spending that people have the ability to cut at will. And finally, I was showing you the results at 3 months before and after, but of course you may be concerned that some of these effects would revert back, and this doesn't seem to be the case. Of course, as we lengthen the number of months in the analysis, we lose potentially kind of the number of observations gets reduced, but we find that all the way to 12 months, we find that the effect seems to be monotonically declining for the overspenders and increasing for the underspenders. But of course, these raw results have a number of potential limitations. For example, they don't account for difference in spending levels across users. You may have that some people are spending $10,000 or $15,000 a month in consumption, some other only $2,000, and everything was done in dollar terms. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to compute the ratio of spending post and before. And we're going to estimate the same relationship. If those people that are overspending compared to consumer reduce the spending after signing up, and those instead that were underspending increase their spending. And once again, if we estimate this distance from peers regression, we still find that the coefficients are different, and they are greater when for those people that have that are overspending compared to those that are underspending. One issue that you may be concerned for is the fact that we see this kind of very strong negative change in spending for those overspenders. And you may be concerned that we are capturing mean reversion. It may be that on the month, individuals are enrolling on the app. They may be been purchasing like a big item, like an iPhone or something along those lines. And then mechanically, you would see these individuals reverting back to a more normal level of spending. Well, we can do it, we can kind of see this and test for this in a number of ways. We first directly control for pre-sign-up spending. And also we can allocate individuals to overspenders or underspenders, not using the month before they sign up for the app about the 2 months before or 3 months before signing up for the apps. And if we do this exercise, we always find that the effect is there. And if anything, like the ones where we see that the biggest kind of mean reversion cuts some of the effect happens if we use the 30 days before sign up as to compute the peer spending relative to the rest, but we find that the results are consistent throughout. Another concern that you may have, and this may be kind of a greater cause of concern, is that you may think that individuals who sign up for status may know that they are underspending or underspending, or overspending or underspending before enrolling for the app. And so they might have changed the spending anyways. And in this case, what we can do actually exploit the cutoffs that the app uses to assign users to peer groups. So the most important cutoffs that the app uses are the ones on the income. So the app uses $35, $50, $75, $100, and $150,000 in cutoffs to create the buckets. And so what we're going to be doing is use the users around the cutoffs that, if you think about it, those people that are just below a cutoff of, for example, $50,000, they're going to see a peer spending that is going to be lowered compared to if they were putting that their income was at 52, exactly because the peer groups are just done in this kind of bucketed way. So those above the cutoff, they're going to see peer groups with a higher spending. Those that instead are below the cutoff are going to see peer groups with lower spending. So the first thing we want to do before getting into an IV type of estimation is to make sure that there are no detectable differences in pre-spending across the threshold. And in the paper, we are very thorough about it here, just to give you a sense of what we have. We're going to show the monthly spending before sign up around the $50,000 threshold, income threshold, and you can see that there is really no difference. But we can go much further than that. We can see whether there are differences, systematic differences in home ownership, credit score, age, asset balance, debt balance, and so on and so forth, exactly around the threshold. And effectively, in all instances, we see that there are no different patterns of behavior. Then what we're going to be doing is keeping only those clients that are close to the threshold. We're going to have an asymmetric threshold because we want to guarantee that we have enough or the same number of individuals above and below the threshold. And but all our results are the same if we use symmetric bandwidth. And then we're going to estimate a very simple two-stage least square regression. We're going to instrument peer spending on this dummy for being above in the first stage. And then we're going to have, in the second stage, we're going to kind of estimate the change in spending on the instrumented peer spending. And the idea is that this beta coefficient should be greater than 0 because the peer spending, instrumented peer spending should have an effect on your change in spending going forward. And when we estimate this two-stage least square regression, we find, well, first of all, in the first stage, the instrument is valid and it's relevant. And then we also find that in the second stage, peer spending is significantly related to the change in spending. Now, of course, you may be concerned that we are using threshold which are kind of round numbers. And so it may be that some individuals may bunch at certain numbers, in the sense that people will say that they make $60,000 or $70,000, even in reality they're making 68 or 58. So what we do is we're repeating the estimate using a placebo instrumental variable estimate, where we are not using the real cutoffs, but we're using round numbers. So we're using 45, 60, 90, 110, and 140. And in these cases, what we see is that, first of all, the first stage is not significant. And in the second stage, we see that the coefficient blows up and stays not significant, which is a typical kind of symptom of a weak instrument. Then we move on and work with heterogeneity results. The first thing we want to do is study whether the reaction is stronger if the signal is more informative. And in fact, what we do find is that individuals where their peer groups comprise people that are more similar to them. So if the peer groups is constructing using a greater number of characteristics, because the app can use all the characteristics and still have a peer group of at least 5,000 individuals will react more. The number of people in the peer group is also relevant in the sense that if people that have peer groups with a larger number of individuals react more. Also, people react more to peer groups where the income width is smaller. As I was sharing before, the cutoffs are done in such a way that they become broader and broader as the income increases. And so what we really do find is that when the income width is smaller, so when the cutoffs at the lower income levels are tighter, the peer groups react more. And finally, we also separate separate our users into those that live in urban areas and those that are living in rural areas, where the first are more likely to observe other people's behavior in a more frequent way because they may walk around the streets and so on and so forth. And we find that exactly those people that were not exposed to peer information behavior before are the ones that react the most to this information provided by status. Another interesting kind of heterogeneity results is trying to understand how the reactions vary by income. So of course you have that low income households are less have less access to information, but of course at the same time a larger part of their income is spent on discretionary, so they may not have the ability to change their spending post signing up for the app. And so at ex-ante, it is not really clear which direction the heterogeneity goes in this respect. And when we actually estimate our results on for individuals on income group 1, so the lowest income, we find a strong change in behavior. And if I go to second, third, and fourth group, so if I go into higher and higher income levels, we find that the effect is still there, of course, but it becomes less economically large. Of course, one issue that you may be concerned of course, is that we have reported a number of specifications. And of course, some of these app users may be users that don't look at the app that much after signing up for the tool. And so we report a lot of robustness tests showing that the results are robust to limiting the sample of users to those that have more than 2 accounts linked, for example, that are under 35 years of age, that have income below $200,000, and also if we filter individuals on the basis of how often they log in and how much they spend on the app. We then also show that users react to really the peer information and not all the other information they are displayed on the app, and that other information is the average spending across the US consumers and their overall level of income. We show that the results are robust to alternative regression specifications if we compute the standard errors in the different ways and if we have different bandwidth for the IV strategy. Now, I know that I only have 1 or 2 minutes left. So let me kind of spend the last couple of slides on the problem of external validity. Like all the results, what we've shown you so far are kind of estimated using a specific population. These are individuals that decided to sign up for status. And so, of course, these individuals might care more about their financial spending or the consumption and financial resources, and they might care more about the peers compared to the rest of the population. So an obvious question you may have is whether these results are externally valid. So what we did is we kind of did exactly the same intervention on a broader non-selected population. So we conducted an experiment on mTurk where we showed individuals we asked individuals what was their marginal propensity to consume out of a lump sum sum that may receive. And then we tell them how individuals that are similar to them usually react. So what is the marginal propensity to consume of people that are similar to them? And we find exactly the same results qualitatively that we find in the paper. Those people that were more willing to consume a lot out of a windfall sum that they were receiving, after seeing that their peers were kind of usually kind of reacting less, they report down, or they change down their reported marginal propensity to consume, and instead those were under consuming, so that had a lower marginal propensity to consume compared to their peers, they instead revise it upwards. And so this asymmetric response, and the fact that these results are very robust and similar to the ones we found on status, makes us believe that actually this mechanism can be deployed on the overall population. So just to conclude, given that I'm over time, we find that the users who spend more than their peers reduce their spending significantly, and those instead that spend less than their peers keep their consumption constant, or if anything, increase slightly their spending. We find that more informative peer signal leads to stronger reaction. And of course, and we can talk about it later, one caveat we want to have here is that reacting to this kind of information is not necessarily optimal. So of course, if you were in a peer group where all your peers were in a tremendous amount of debt, then of course, it may not be optimal for you to kind of conform yourself to the behavior of the peer group you were assigned. But we kind of believe that this mechanism is very important because it can pave the way into the design of robo-advisors for consumption behavior in the future. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the comments by David.
Thank you so much, Alberto. David is now going to discuss the paper.
So thank you very much, Alberto, for a great presentation, and thanks everyone for having me to this. So so this discussion will be from a helicopter point of view. So the paper has an extremely impressive empirical analysis with very careful methodologies, robustness checks, thoughtful interpretation, very thorough consideration of alternative explanations, all focused mainly on broader conceptual issues. So what does the paper teach us more broadly? Well, here's a possible hint rather than an answer, that as the authors discuss in the paper, many people do not seem to save enough to maintain their consumption levels in retirement. So there's been a lot of policy concern about overconsumption or undersaving. And the findings here are that social information about the consumption or spending of others, when provided through a disclosure rather than through direct social observation or interactions, affects spending choices. So that suggests more generally that social information may be important for consumption savings decisions, not just in this experiment. And to take that further, maybe observation of others is an important cause of the undersaving problems. So maybe when people observe others, maybe that process is biased. Or when they make their updates from observation of others, maybe there are some psychological biases that are causing people to update incorrectly and leading them to consume too much. So this raises the question, at least, of whether overconsumption is a social finance problem. So there have been theories of overconsumption that are based on individual psychology, but maybe social observation or interaction is important. So there are lots of theories of the consumption saving decision and of possible overconsumption. And here's a list of some behavioral theories. Several of these are quite famous theories. So there's the present bias theory, or hyperbolic discounting. And I'll say a bit more about each of these, but for now, I'll list them. There's the wealth signaling theory that people like to show off, and often called Veblen effects. There is the theory that people have preference interactions, that how much I consume today, how much I enjoy consuming today depends on how much my peers are consuming, and sometimes called keeping up with the Joneses preferences. There's the speculative disagreement theory, and my co-authors and myself, the visibility bias or social observation theory. So before I talk about each of these theories, I'll say a little about what lessons the authors draw about competing theories. So the abstract says we isolate and quantify the information channel of peer effects in a setting that rules out various other possible interfering effects. And I think that you heard this in the talk, in Alberto's talk today, that there's a great emphasis on sharply pinning down this information channel. That's an important contribution. Now, in regard to competing theories, this has a kind of implicit perspective that each theory is a channel, and there's evidence. There's now provided by this paper sharp evidence for the information channel, and we have not very much comment in particular about the other possible channels. And that's very reasonable because a test of one channel does not rule out all the other channels. However, a key value added when a new well-identified test is provided is to get more insight about how important different competing theories are and which are valid. And to have a little bit of scoreboard here, the findings are a victory for some information-based theories, and I'll argue the results are a defeat for some other information-based theories, because some of them do fit these results and some of them do not. And this is at least a small defeat for non-informational theories, in the sense that there are several non-informational theories which predict that in this experiment there would be zero effect. So that finding this does not give any new support to those theories. So now I will talk a little about these different theories and what they predict about the effects of disclosure of the expenditures of others on consumption and on overconsumption especially. So let's start with the present bias theory. And perhaps a little out of order, I'll emphasize the bottom line first. What is the prediction? And then give some explanation. So the prediction of this theory is that disclosure of information about the expenditures of others has no effect on one's consumption. So this is not, the evidence is not consistent with this prediction. So in particular, if we take a present bias theory, at least in pure form, it's preference-based. It is asocial. It's not based on information transmission between individuals. Consumption is not driven by learning from others, whether correct or incorrect. That's not what's going on in this approach. Instead, people overconsume because they find doing that tempting. They have a self-control problem. And in simplest form, the model is deterministic. And that means that people already know the expenditures of others even before the disclosure. The effects of the present bias model hold perfectly strongly in a deterministic world. Now, of course, one can, for any of these approaches, one can go beyond the pure approach and add complexity. So in this case, for example, one could add uncertainty to the model by having people not be sure about the preferences of others. And therefore, people don't know what to expect about how much others will consume. But even in such an extension, conjecturally, disclosure of the expenditures of others is going to have no effect on a given individual's consumption, because what's driving consumption is not an agent's beliefs about other agents' preferences. It's just one's own preferences, one's own temptation to overconsume. So I'll now move to another preference-based approach, the keeping up with the Jones approach. And here, again, the prediction is that disclosure of information about the expenditures of others has no effect on an agent's consumption. So this theory is preference-based. This is a social theory. People do care about what other agents are doing. In fact, they're trying to consume in coordination with the consumption of others. That coordination may be a positive or negative interaction. And in general, this approach can lead to either over or under consumption. However, at least in pure form, consumption is not driven by learning from others. So the basic effects occur in a deterministic world where everyone already knows the expenditures of others before the disclosure. Now, again, one could add some unknown state variable so that agents are able to learn. They are able to get meaningful information by observing the expenditures of others. But there's no obvious reason why disclosure of the spending of others would cause an asymmetric effect on a given focal agent. Why it would cause asymmetrically reduce the spending of overspenders and much more weakly increase the spending of underspenders. Right. Okay, now I'll propose something not from the literature, which is a rational information channel. And this is entirely conjectural, hand waving. So the predictions here are that disclosure of information about the spending of others causes agents to shift their consumption toward the disclosed spending level of their peers. So basically, I think my peers know something. So if they're spending more than me, I think, well, in that case, I should be spending more. If they're spending less than me, I should be spending less. That effect will be stronger for more informative disclosures. And I'll argue this would, in a natural setup, be a symmetric effect on the consumption of overspenders versus underspenders. So the first two predictions are promising and fitting with the data, but because of the third prediction, this rational information channel is rejected. So a quick version of the theory here, there's some unknown state variable X, and that's how much people need to save. X is the same for everyone. It's maybe the probability that any given agent gets laid off from his firm or has a health problem. Then each agent receives a noisy signal about X, and these signals are conditionally IID, so there's a possibility of learning from others. Let's say distributions are normal. And then if the expenditures of others are disclosed to an agent, then the agent also learns from those expenditures. I'll skip technicalities. So then, because of the symmetry of the setup, underspenders are going to increase their spending, overspenders will decrease the spending, but that will be a symmetric effect. So let's go on now to wealth signaling or Veblen effects. So the prediction here is that disclosure of the spending of others has no effect on an agent's consumption. So the theory, we can call this an information-based theory. I don't know if we should call it a channel. So in this theory, people like to be perceived by others as being wealthy. And people do learn by observing the spending of others. What they're learning, though, is about the wealth of others. They're not learning about the desirability of their own level of spending. And so they don't learn any useful information about how they themselves should consume. people in the basic model already know the distribution of wealth in the economy. They just don't know the wealth of a given individual. So the disclosure of others' consumption does not change the decision of how much to consume. Now, once again, one can extend the setting and allow for the possibility that people don't know all the parameters for the distribution of wealth in the economy. So then when I learn how much someone else is spending, that gives me some more information about the structure of the whole economy. And that could shift the parameters of the signaling equilibrium. But even so, there's no obvious reason to expect a bigger effect when a disclosure is by an a bigger effect of disclosure of the spending of others on an overspender versus an underspender. Now we'll turn to the speculative disagreement theory. So the prediction again is no effect of disclosure of the spending of others on consumption. So in this theory, people have strong priors about future outcomes in the economy, and they have the opportunity to take bets against each other in an asset market. And because they disagree, each agent thinks that she is on the correct side of this bet. So both sides think that they're going to make money on average. And so this causes agents on the whole to view themselves as wealthy. Now, wealth can have there are then wealth effects on consumption. So to the extent that this disagreement is an error, you can get overconsumption potentially. Now, people have strong priors in the model, and indeed, they do not update their beliefs. So the disclosure of expenditures of others does not change anyone's minds. Trivially, there's no effect on consumption. Once again, it would be natural to weaken or moderate that assumption of strong priors so that disclosure does cause some updating. But once again, there's no obvious reason for the asymmetric form of updating that is found in the data here. So I'll now turn to the visibility bias social observation theory. And in some cases of our model, we have let me say that this last item depends on the case of the model, but for the first result or first prediction is that disclosure of the expenditures of others causes people to shift consumption toward their peers. So basically, people learn something useful from their peers, at least they think it's useful, so they move in the direction of their peers. The effect is stronger for more informative disclosures. So far, so good. And in some cases of the model, this is an asymmetric effect where overspenders decrease their consumption more than underspenders increase their consumption. So in this theory, as before, there's an unknown state variable X, which measures the need to save. And it's the same for everyone. And again, agents have private signals about X. Then each agent gets to observe some small sample of others' consumption spending. The two key assumptions of the model are visibility bias and neglect of selection bias. So visibility bias is based on the idea that consumption activities generate publicly visible cues. And so I'll give the example of my neighbor has a boat parked in her driveway. When that happens, I notice that boat and I say, wow, my neighbor really spends heavily on entertainment. If there's no boat parked in my neighbor's driveway, I don't notice either way, or at least I'm less likely to notice. So this visibility bias involves greater attention to what is seen than what is unseen, or at least is less likely to be seen. Then combining that with what is equally important is neglect of this selection bias. So there's a selection bias in what I see or in what I notice, and I neglect that selection bias, so I don't adjust for it. In consequence, I update too strongly toward thinking that others are consuming heavily. And if I think that others are consuming heavily, I conclude that they have information that indicates that there is little need to save, that X is low. That causes me to overconsume. Now, I in turn become a model for observation by others. So there's also a positive feedback effect, which can cause this overconsumption to be very strong in equilibrium. So now let's look at an example for the effects of disclosure in this setting. So let's look at a case where there are smart agents who know the true value of X almost perfectly. And in the model, that would mean that they have very extensive private information. So they're going to consume almost optimally, close to the full information decision. As for, there's another set of agents, the biased agents. And for the reasons I've just discussed, they update too optimistically about X because of visibility bias. So they overconsume, and they don't realize that others are less optimistic than they are. They don't recognize that there's visibility bias. They don't know that they're biased. So suppose that there's a salient disclosure of the average consumption spending of others. The smart agents, who are underspenders relative to others, or relative to the per capita average in the population, update optimistically only slightly because they know the state almost perfectly. The biased agents, the overspenders, become substantially less optimistic because they didn't realize that other agents out there, namely the smart agents, were consuming much less than they are. So this leads to an asymmetric effect on spending of overspenders versus underspenders, and that reduces per capita average consumption. And just by the way, such an asymmetric effect can also occur in versions of the model without smart agents. So to sum up, the paper offers important findings. It shows that social information is important for consumption choices. It provides a strong contribution to the growing field of social finance. It suggests that bias in beliefs may be a source of overconsumption, and it suggests that social observation may play an important role in this process. And finally, I've argued that the results have implications for competing theories of overconsumption.
Great. Thank you so much, David, for this great discussion. Alberto, do you want to take, before we take questions from the audience, do you want to take the opportunity to respond?
I'm in awe of this discussion. Thank you so much, David. I think it was incredible. I think that this is going to be incredibly helpful for us just because the clarity of how to categorize the various competing theories of overconsumption and which kind of mechanism are consistent with our findings and which are not is something that we have been struggling quite a lot with, exactly because sometimes in the standard theories are easy to reject, but then of course you have that people can think of extending slightly one of the theory to fit some of the findings, but not all. And so I think that what we're gonna have to do is to kind of add a section in the paper where we kind of discuss the whole kind of panorama of potential theories and what fits and what doesn't fit. I think at some point we were doing something along these lines, but we were not doing nearly as good as a job as what you've done in this discussion. I think that, I know that if you can share the slides, that would be fantastic. It's just going to guide our entire kind of revision.
Well, thanks so much, Alberto. And I'm delighted to share the slides. And in fact, I understand that the slides will be posted on the ABFR site in due course. And I do think that in talking about conjectural implications of different approaches, it's a kind of scary moving target because the people who write in those fields may say, wait, we can extend it this other way. But I did my best in to wave my hands and suggest what seems the natural possible extensions from my point of view.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much.
And thank you also for giving such a stimulating paper that made it fun to think about.
Thanks.
Wonderful. So, in terms of questions, so the audience, you should feel free to type in any questions in the Q&A. We do have one question from Daniel Selman. You kind of touched a little bit on this in the conclusion, but Daniel asks, so we're talking about overspending relative to peers, but do we know where users are relative to what rational consumption models would predict? So I think it's just to rephrase, if I may, is just, are there any normative implications, or what do we think? Is it moving towards, if you want to share just a little bit more, what stance do you take on that? Yeah.
I think, yeah. So, I mean, one thing that kind of we try to stay away is to trying to argue that, this reaction is optimal. And of course, because once again, depending on what kind of peers you're matched with, you're going to have that potentially this is going to be harmful compared to what a rational consumption model would predict. One thing that I'll say, and this is something that maybe we could do, is remember that the app shows individuals the behavior of their peers, but also the US national average. So one thing that we have not done that kind of just popped in my mind right now is to see whether those people where the kind of that we show that people react to peer information much more than the average US national information, but we have not focused on those people where their peer group is such that their consumption, that their peer groups maybe are in heavily indebted, and maybe they are coming from a very low kind of the areas where consumption or debt seems to be very high. So that's something that we can definitely do. But I agree that if I were to design a robo-advisor, like this is something that we take the data from an app that developed this tool independently. If I were to kind of design a tool to help people making better consumption decision, maybe I would do it slightly differently. Maybe I would have this in kind of peer information, but I would also have some sort of guidelines as to what would be the optimal consumption that a standard life cycle model would imply. But I think Daniel's point is super well taken. I mean, I can think that this could create debt spirals or like overconsumption for those people that are matched with peers that have consumption behaviors or patterns that are out of whack.
Great. We also have a question now from Bryzgalova about maybe the incentives, right, to implement some of this on the side of financial institutions, right? If they would be willing or incentivized to use such an app, because if they make money on credit card borrowing, would they ever want to encourage greater savings rates, right? So here it's.
I think, yeah. So, I mean, one thing that is important is that, some of these apps, some of these apps kind of, they provide peer benchmarking information on the part of consumption, for example, status, but they also have potentially other, and this is products that they've introduced afterwards. For example, it provides benchmark on the APR of the credit cards that people have, right? So if you have a certain credit card and have a very high APR, it will tell you, look, these are kind of the people that are similar to you are using credit cards that that are more beneficial, or the same for kind of mortgage and so on and so forth. I think that there is definitely this issues that the financial institutions themselves or credit cards may not be super keen in having people reduce their consumption behavior, but at the same time, and this is something that happens quite often. So I don't know if you are aware, like there is a very, very large income aggregator named Mint.com, and so Status was launched in 2017 with this peer comparison feature, and Mint.com introduced it last year. So now Mint.com will have peer consumption information and so on and so forth. So I think that some of the innovation that is introduced by these apps, again, that trickles down into kind of larger financial institutions. And I wouldn't be surprised if at some point you may have that, Wells Fargo and other kind of Bank of America would do it, just because at the same time, these banks have the incentive to provide some of these services to make sure that individuals, so users, don't go and kind of give their information somewhere else, right? So if I'm Wells Fargo, I have all the incentive to provide all the type of information that individuals may need, so that individuals don't sign up for mint.com and so on. So I think that it's a very different mechanism, but I think deep down, some of these tools are going to be kind of becoming more and more prevalent. I have another paper on this goal setting and saving, and I think I've noticed something similar. So goal setting was something that was not very common in many of these bank apps, and then after companies or fintech apps started introducing them, then over the years you start seeing that if you open a Chase Bank or a Bank of America, Wells Fargo, you'll see that there will be a goal setting feature for where people can set goals and decide how much to save for certain specific purposes. But yeah, that's a very great question, Bruce.
All right, thank you so much to our speakers today. Big round of virtual applause. Before we are going to, we're going to enter the unrecorded part, the discussion part. But before we do that, I'd like to announce that our next webinar is going to be sometime in February next year, and we are going to be following up with more details. So please stay in this Zoom room, and we're going to upgrade everyone to a panelist to continue the discussion for a little bit.